there so much traffic, and why are your signal lights not working properly? This is a headache.
Ma'am, wait, we'll try to fix it. Just hang on a second.
This waiting? I've been stuck here forever!
Ma'am!
Enough!
Hey!
July 15th, 2023, Scottsdale, Arizona. Margaret Caldwell had killed a man 30 years ago. Not with her hands, with her silence. When Officer Danny Reeves flashed his lights behind her Mercedes, she saw his nameplate and felt her world tilt. The same last name, the same dark eyes she remembered from the hospital bed in 1993. Maggie rolled down her window and did what she'd been doing for 3 decades. She attacked first, called him worthless, threatened his job, shoved his chest when he asked for her license. What she didn't know was that Danny had been searching for her since he turned 18. The body cam was rolling, the internet was watching, and in 48 hours, a forensic psychiatrist would see her facial tics on the viral video and remember a nurse who'd falsified medication logs. Danny Reeves had waited half his life for Margaret Caldwell to show the world who she really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix sun had turned Maggie's Mercedes into an oven, but the heat crawling up her spine had nothing to do with the temperature. Officer Reeves stood beside her window, his hand resting on his radio, watching her with those same dark eyes that had stared up at her from a hospital bed 30 years ago, except now they belonged to a grown man with a badge and a gun. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." The words cut through the desert air like a blade. Maggie's manicured fingers gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the black leather. She could feel the familiar twitch starting beneath her left eye, the same nervous tic that had plagued her during those final weeks at Phoenix General Hospital in 1993. "You can't be serious." Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd spent decades ordering people around. "Do you have any idea who I am? I own half the developments between here and Fountain Hills." But Danny Reeves didn't flinch. If anything, his expression hardened. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Caldwell." The way he said her name made her blood freeze. Not like a traffic cop who'd read it off her license. Like someone who'd been practicing it, memorizing it, waiting to say it out loud. Maggie's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Probably another client desperate to close before the summer market cooled. 3 hours ago, she'd been Margaret Caldwell, real estate queen of North Scottsdale, rushing between showings in her climate-controlled German engineering. Her biggest worry had been whether the Henderson property would appraise high enough to save the deal. Now she was staring into the face of a ghost. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Danny's voice was steady, professional, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper, something that had been building for decades. "You assaulted a police officer. You're under arrest." The handcuffs appeared in his hands like magic. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as the metal caught the blazing afternoon sun. She thought of her daughter Emma, 3 years into her residency at Mayo Clinic. Emma, who still believed her mother was a hero who'd left nursing to build something better. Emma, who had no idea that every luxury she'd enjoyed growing up was paid for with blood money. "Please," Maggie whispered, and hated herself for the word. "My daughter." "Your daughter isn't here," Danny said quietly. "Just like my father wasn't there when you decided to let him die." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. Maggie's vision blurred at the edges, the desert landscape swimming in the heat. She could feel her carefully constructed world starting to crack, 30 years of lies threatening to spill out onto the scorching asphalt. A pickup truck slowed as it passed, the driver craning his neck to get a better look. Someone else was probably already posting about it on social media. Rich woman getting arrested in North Scottsdale. The story would spread like wildfire through the gossip networks of her gated community. But they didn't know the real story. They didn't know about Thomas Reeves, room 314, and the morphine that never made it into his fourth. They didn't know about the logs she'd falsified, the signatures she'd forged, the silence she'd bought with her co-workers' paychecks. Danny moved closer to her window, and Maggie caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with desert dust and authority. "Turn off the engine and step out slowly." Her hands shook as she turned the key. The Mercedes fell silent except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of traffic on the 101. When she opened the door, the heat hit her like a wall, but it was nothing compared to the cold dread spreading through her chest. "Hands behind your back." Maggie complied, feeling the handcuffs bite into her wrists. The metal was already burning hot from the sun, She thought of all the times she'd watched suspects on the news and felt nothing but contempt. Now she was one of them, standing on the side of the road while her life imploded in real time. "You have the right to remain silent," Danny began, his voice carrying across the desert air. A notification chimed from somewhere, probably his body cam uploading to the cloud, preserving this moment forever. As he recited her rights, Maggie found herself studying his profile. He had his father's jawline, the same stubborn set to his shoulders that Thomas had maintained even as the cancer ate him alive. She wondered if Danny knew how much his father had suffered in those final days. If he knew that Thomas had called out for his son until his voice gave out completely. If he knew that she'd been the only one there to hear it. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound like a coffin closing. Maggie Caldwell, real estate mogul and keeper of secrets, was about to discover that some debts could never be paid in full. They could only be collected. The patrol car's back seat smelled of disinfectant and desperation, a combination that transported Maggie instantly back to those sterile hospital corridors where her nightmares were born. Through the bulletproof partition, she watched Danny complete his paperwork with methodical precision, each checkbox and signature sealing her fate a little tighter. Her wrists ached where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin, leaving angry red welts that would bruise by morning. If she lived to see morning, if Emma ever spoke to her again, if the empire she'd built on borrowed time survived the earthquake that was coming. The radio crackled with dispatch calls. Domestic disturbance on Camelback, fender bender near Scottsdale Fashion Square. Life continuing its normal rhythm while hers shattered like glass in the desert heat. Danny's shoulders moved as he wrote, and she found herself memorizing the curve of his neck, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. Just like Thomas's had, before the chemo took it all. Don't think about Thomas. Don't think about room 314. Don't think about the way he whispered Danny's name in those final hours. But the memories came anyway, flooding back with the force of a dam breaking. Thomas Reeves, 42 years old, pancreatic cancer, stage 4th, a single father working construction who couldn't afford the good insurance, couldn't afford the private rooms, couldn't afford anything except hope. And hope, as Maggie had learned, was the cruelest currency of all. She pressed her face against the cool glass of the car window, watching the familiar landscape of her kingdom roll past. There was the Ritz-Carlton where she'd closed the Morrison deal just last month, the Gallery District where she'd convinced a tech billionaire to buy that overpriced Adobe monstrosity. Every street corner held a memory of conquest, of commission checks, of the life she'd built on Thomas Reeves's grave. Danny's phone buzzed, and she watched him check the screen. A smile ghosted across his lips, soft, genuine, so different from the cold professionalism he'd shown her. The expression transformed his face, making him look younger, vulnerable, human. She wondered who could make him smile like that. A girlfriend? A wife? Children of his own? The thought of Danny having children made something twist in her chest. What kind of bedtime stories did he tell them? What kind of man had he become without his father's guidance? Thomas had talked about his son constantly during those long night shifts. Danny's Little League games, his science projects, his dreams of becoming a police officer just like the ones who'd helped them after his mother left. "He wants to protect people," Thomas had whispered during one of his lucid moments, his voice barely audible above the mechanical wheeze of the oxygen machine. "Says he wants to make sure kids never feel scared, like he did when Diane walked out." Maggie had nodded and adjusted his pillow and promised him more morphine that never came. She'd let him believe she cared, let him trust her with his fears and hopes and desperate love for the 8-year-old boy who visited every Sunday with crayon drawings and gap-toothed smiles. The patrol car turned onto Camelback Road, and Maggie's heart clenched as they passed the turnoff to her neighborhood. Her house, her sanctuary, sat just 2 miles away, behind iron gates and manicured lawns. The pool would be sparkling blue in the afternoon sun, the temperature-controlled wine cellar humming quietly in the basement, the framed photo of Emma's medical school graduation gleaming on the mantel. Emma. God, Emma. Her daughter's face floated in her mind. Serious brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the determined set of her jaw when she talked about her pediatric rotation, the way she lit up when describing a successful procedure. Emma had her father's hands, surgeon's hands, steady and sure. She'd chosen medicine because she wanted to save people, to make a difference. What would she think if she knew the truth? That her Harvard tuition was paid for with blood money? That her mother's success story was built on a foundation of lies and death? Maggie's phone had been buzzing constantly in Danny's front seat. Clients, colleagues, her assistant wondering where she was. By now, someone would have recognized her license plate from the traffic stop. The gossip networks of North Scottsdale were more efficient than any news organization. Her arrest would be trending on neighborhood social media before she made it to booking. But it was the silence that terrified her most. Emma always texted her after difficult shifts at the hospital, sharing small victories and seeking comfort for the losses. Their daily conversations were the one pure thing in Maggie's life, untainted by guilt or calculation. Just a mother and daughter talking about medicine and life and dreams. Soon those conversations would be impossible. Soon Emma would learn who her mother really was. Danny finished his paperwork and started the engine. As they pulled away from the curb, Maggie caught a glimpse of her Mercedes in the side mirror, abandoned, doors open, hazard lights blinking like a dying heartbeat. A tow truck was already approaching, ready to cart away another piece of her carefully constructed life. The radio crackled again, and dispatch announced their destination, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, the place where her secrets would finally see daylight. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office rose from the desert like a concrete monument to justice, all sharp angles and reflective glass that threw the afternoon sun back at the sky in blinding sheets. Maggie had driven past this building countless times over the years, never imagining she'd see it from the back of a patrol car. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of her most expensive properties sat just blocks away, luxury condos where Phoenix's elite paid millions to live above the consequences of their choices. Danny parked in the prisoner transport bay, the engine silent, sudden, and final. Through the reinforced windows, Maggie could see other officers moving with practiced efficiency, processing the day's collection of human wreckage, filing reports, pursuing justice with the same methodical precision Danny had shown during her arrest. "Before we go in," Danny said, his voice cutting through the partition, "there's something you should know." Maggie's breath caught. She'd been dreading this moment, the reveal that would confirm her worst fears. "What?" Danny turned in his seat, those familiar dark eyes meeting hers through the metal mesh. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 decades. "My father kept a journal, every day, right up until the end. He wrote about the nurses, the doctors, the way the pain felt like fire in his bones. But mostly, he wrote about you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Maggie's vision blurred, and she felt that old tick start beneath her eye, the same nervous twitch that had plagued her during those final shifts at Phoenix General. "He trusted you," Danny continued, pulling a worn leather journal from his jacket pocket. The cover was faded, the edges soft with age. "He wrote about how you promised to take care of him, how you said the pain medicine was coming, how you looked him in the eye and lied." Maggie's throat closed. She'd managed to forget so many details over the years, burying them beneath layers of success and willful amnesia. But Thomas's journal, his actual words, his documented suffering, that was evidence she couldn't explain away. The night before he died, he wrote this. Danny opened the journal, his fingers finding a page marked with a faded yellow sticky note. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The nurse with the scar on her hand, the one who always wears the silver bracelet, she promised me more medicine hours ago. Danny's coming tomorrow with his school pictures. I need to hold on. I need the pain to stop so I can tell him I love him one more time." The description hit Maggie like ice water. The scar on her left hand, a jagged line from a childhood accident with broken glass. The silver bracelet, a graduation gift from nursing school that she'd worn every shift for luck. Details so specific, so damning, that no reasonable person could doubt the connection. "He never got to see those school pictures," Danny said, closing the journal with deliberate care. "He died calling for medicine that never came, asking for a nurse who'd already decided his life wasn't worth her time." Maggie wanted to explain, to tell him about the impossible choices she'd faced that night, about Dr. Harrison's threats, about the missing morphine that wasn't her fault, about the administrative failures that had created the shortage. But the words stuck in her throat, choked off by the weight of 30 years' worth of lies. Danny's radio crackled to life, and dispatch's voice filled the car. "Unit 347. Detective Chen requests immediate notification upon your arrival with the Caldwell suspect. She's en route to interview." Detective Chen. The name meant nothing to Maggie, but something in Danny's expression shifted, surprise, maybe even concern. He keyed his radio with sharp efficiency. "Copy, dispatch, ETA 2 minutes. He turned back to Maggie, and for the first time since the traffic stop, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "Detective Chen works cold cases. he said slowly, as if the words were forming a puzzle in his mind. She's been reviewing old files from Phoenix General, looking into a pattern of suspicious deaths from the early 90s. The blood drained from Maggie's face. Thomas hadn't been her only victim, just the one that haunted her dreams. There had been others, patients whose pain medication had been delayed or misfiled while she'd sold their doses to supplement her pathetic nurse's salary. She told herself they were already dying, that a few hours of extra suffering didn't matter in the grand scheme of terminal illness. But if Detective Chen had been investigating, if she'd found connections between the deaths, if Thomas's journal wasn't the only evidence. Danny was studying her reaction with the intensity of a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. You're remembering now, aren't you? All of them. All the patients you let suffer while you pocketed their medicine. Maggie closed her eyes and the faces came flooding back. Mrs. Patterson in room 302, Mr. Valdez in the ICU. Sweet old Mrs. Chen who'd called her angel even as Maggie stole her final comfort. The weight of their suffering pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. When she opened her eyes, Danny was already getting out of the car, his father's journal tucked safely away. Through the windshield, Maggie could see a woman in a detective shield approaching, Asian, middle-aged, carrying a thick file folder that looked ominously familiar. Detective Chen stopped beside Danny, and they spoke in low, urgent tones. Whatever they were discussing, it involved frequent glances back at Maggie and the careful exchange of information that looked rehearsed, planned. Maggie's phone, still buzzing incessantly in the front seat, finally fell silent. The sudden quiet felt ominous, like the moment before an avalanche when even the birds stopped singing. Through the car's speaker system, she heard Detective Chen's voice for the first time. Officer Reeves, based on the evidence in this file and the suspect's visible identification markers, I'm invoking jurisdiction under the cold case statute. This is no longer just about assault on an officer. The detective's words echoed in the confined space as they approached the car, and Maggie realized with crystalline clarity that her old life, her empire, her reputation, her carefully constructed identity, wasn't just ending, it was already gone. The car door opened with a metallic screech that sounded like a scream. Maggie's legs trembled as she stepped onto the scorching asphalt, the handcuffs making her stumble slightly. Detective Chen approached with the measured gait of someone who'd done this dance 1,000 times before, but there was something predatory in her eyes that made Maggie's mouth go dry. Mrs. Caldwell. The detective's voice was professionally neutral, but Maggie caught the slight emphasis on the surname, as if Chen knew it wasn't the name she'd been born with. I'm Detective Sarah Chen, Maricopa County Cold Case Division. The name hit Maggie like a sledgehammer. Chen. Mrs. Chen from room 318, the sweet elderly woman who died calling for her granddaughter, begging for relief that never came. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. The granddaughter had grown up to become a detective, and now she stood 3 feet away with a file folder full of ghosts. There must be some mistake, Maggie heard herself say, her voice sounding hollow and strange. I'm a real estate broker. I have clients expecting me this afternoon. This is all a misunderstanding. Detective Chen tilted her head slightly, and Maggie saw recognition flicker across her features. Not just professional recognition, something deeper, more personal. The detective's grip tightened on the file folder, knuckles white against the manila surface. Funny thing about misunderstandings, Chen said quietly. They have a way of clearing themselves up when you look at them from the right angle. She opened the folder just wide enough for Maggie to catch a glimpse of photographs. Hospital corridors, patient charts, time-stamped security footage from 3 decades ago. Especially when the evidence has been waiting patiently for someone to connect the dots. Danny stepped closer, his presence radiating a controlled tension that made the desert air feel electric. Detective, the suspect matches the physical descriptions from the witness statements. The scar, the nervous tic, even the way she moves her hands when she's lying. Maggie's left hand flew instinctively to the silver bracelet on her wrist, the same nervous gesture that had betrayed her countless times during those final months at Phoenix General. The movement wasn't lost on either of the officers. She watched their eyes track the motion like wolves scenting blood. I think you have me confused with someone else, Maggie said, desperation creeping into her voice. I haven't worked in healthcare for 30 years. I run Caldwell Properties. You can verify my employment history, my business licenses, everything. Oh, we will, Chen said, closing the folder with a sound like a judge's gavel. But first, Let's talk about Margaret Sullivan. That was your maiden name, wasn't it? Before you reinvented yourself as Maggie Caldwell, real estate mogul. The use of her old name sent ice through Maggie's veins. Margaret Sullivan had died the day she walked out of Phoenix General for the last time, buried beneath layers of forged documents and carefully constructed lies. She'd spent a fortune making sure that name would never surface again. "I need to call my lawyer," Maggie said, the words coming out in a rush. "This is harassment. Whatever you think you know." "Your lawyer can meet us at the station," Danny interrupted, his hand moving to her elbow with gentle but implacable pressure. "Right now, we need to process your arrest and get you settled in for what's going to be a very long conversation." As they walked toward the building's entrance, Maggie caught sight of other people staring. Officers, civilians, anyone within range of the unfolding drama. She tried to keep her head high, to maintain some semblance of the dignity that had carried her through 3 decades of lies, but she could feel herself crumbling with each step. Her phone, still buzzing in Danny's possession, would be lighting up with calls from clients, from Emma, from the carefully curated network of contacts who knew her as the successful businesswoman who'd pulled herself up by her bootstraps. None of them knew about Margaret Sullivan, about the patients who died in agony, about the morphine that had funded her escape from poverty. "My daughter," Maggie whispered as they reached the building's entrance. "She's a doctor, a pediatric resident. This will destroy her career." Detective Chen paused, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, something almost like sympathy flickered across her features. "Your daughter chose to save lives," she said quietly. "My grandmother died begging for mercy that never came. Maybe you should have thought about the consequences 30 years ago." The building's air conditioning hit Maggie like a wall of Arctic air, but it did nothing to stop the cold sweat beating on her forehead. Through the glass doors behind them, she could see the desert shimmering in the afternoon heat, the landscape of her kingdom, the empire built on borrowed time. Danny's radio crackled one final time as they approached the booking desk. "Unit 347, be advised. Media has been notified of the arrest. Channel 12 is en route to your location." The words echoed in the sterile hallway, and Maggie realized that her carefully constructed world wasn't just ending. The whole city was about to watch it burn. The booking desk stretched before them like an altar of judgment, staffed by a desk sergeant whose weathered face suggested he'd processed every variation of human failure Phoenix had to offer. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the sickly pallor that made even innocent people look guilty. Maggie's designer heels clicked against the linoleum with each reluctant step, the sound echoing off institutional walls that had absorbed decades of confessions and denials. "Margaret Caldwell," Danny announced, producing her driver's license along with a folder of paperwork. "Assault on an officer, resisting arrest. Detective Chen is handling additional charges." The sergeant's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency, but his eyes kept drifting to the television mounted in the corner, where a local news anchor was discussing a viral video and developing story. Maggie's stomach clenched as she realized the footage from Danny's body cam had already begun its journey through Phoenix's media ecosystem. "Phone's been ringing off the hook," the sergeant muttered to Chen. "Reporters want to know if this is connected to that cold case thing you've been working. Channel 12 setting up in the parking lot." Detective Chen's expression darkened. "Tell them we'll have a statement later. Right now I need room 3 prepared for interview, and I want the 1993 Phoenix General files transferred to my desk within the hour." The mention of 1993 made Maggie's knees buckle slightly. That was the year everything had fallen apart, when the missing morphine and unexplained patient deaths had finally triggered an internal investigation. She'd submitted her resignation 3 days before the inquiry began, disappearing into the administrative chaos that had swallowed Phoenix General when it merged with Mercy Health System. "Ma'am, I need your personal effects," the desk sergeant said, extending a plastic bin toward her. "Jewelry, purse, anything in your pockets." Maggie's fingers trembled as she removed her watch, a Cartier that had cost more than she'd earned in 6 months as a nurse. The silver bracelet came next, the one that had marked her so clearly in Thomas Reeves's journal. As it clattered into the bin, she felt like she was shedding pieces of her carefully constructed identity. "The earrings, too," the sergeant prompted. She reached for the diamond studs Emma had given her for Christmas, and suddenly she was crying. Not the sophisticated tears of a woman facing legal difficulties, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. The earrings represented everything pure in her life: her daughter's love, the family she tried to build, the mother she pretended to be. "I need to call my daughter," she gasped between sobs, "before she sees this on the news. Please. She's at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and if this gets out before I can explain—" "You'll get your phone call," Chen said, but there was something cold in her voice that suggested the detective knew exactly how that conversation would go. "Right after we process your fingerprints and photograph." The fingerprinting station stood like a monument to the inevitable, all digital scanners and high-resolution cameras designed to capture permanent records of this moment. Maggie had driven past this building hundreds of times, never imagining her prints would join the millions already stored in their databases. Now they would search those prints against unsolved cases, cold files, any investigation that might benefit from knowing Margaret Sullivan had survived to become Maggie Caldwell. "Press your index finger here," the technician instructed, guiding her hand to the scanner. The machine beeped, capturing the unique whirls and loops that would forever link her to this moment. As each finger was processed, Maggie found herself remembering the patients whose deaths she'd caused through negligence and greed. Mrs. Patterson, who'd died clutching a photograph of her grandchildren. Mr. Valdez, who'd begged her in broken English for just enough morphine to sleep. And Thomas Reeves, who'd written about her in his journal with the trust of a man who believed nurses were angels of mercy. The camera flash exploded in her vision, freezing this moment for posterity. The mugshot that would appear on every news website in Arizona before dinner. Her mascara had run in black streams down her cheeks, her carefully styled hair hung limp with sweat, and her eyes carried the hollow look of someone whose secrets had finally consumed them. Danny appeared at her elbow as the booking process concluded, his expression unreadable. "Detective Chen wants to start the interview now," he said. "Your lawyer can meet us there, but she's not waiting any longer." As they walked toward the interview rooms, Maggie caught a glimpse through the lobby windows of news vans arriving in the parking lot, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Reporters were already setting up, checking equipment, preparing to broadcast her downfall to the world. Her phone, still buzzing incessantly in the evidence bag, finally fell silent. The last piece of her old life had just died. The interview room was smaller than Maggie had expected, its beige walls closing in like a tomb. Detective Chen settled across the metal table with the deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation, her case file positioned between them like evidence at trial. The fluorescent light overhead cast harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty, but Chen's face remained professionally neutral as she opened the folder. "Before we begin," Chen said, her voice carrying an odd formality, "I need to read you your rights again. This interview is being recorded." Maggie barely heard the Miranda warning. Her eyes were fixed on the photographs spilling from Chen's file, hospital corridors she recognized, patient charts with familiar handwriting, security footage timestamps from July 1993. But it was the personal photo tucked between the official documents that made her blood freeze. An elderly Asian woman in a hospital bed, smiling despite the pain etched in her features. "My grandmother," Chen said quietly following Maggie's gaze. "Rose Chen, room 318, Phoenix General, terminal pancreatic cancer. She died on your shift, July 15th, 1993. The world tilted sideways. Maggie gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the metal surface. Mrs. Chen, sweet, trusting Mrs. Chen, who had called her angel in broken English, who had pressed a jade bracelet into her palm as a gift. The same Mrs. Chen whose morphine doses Maggie had systematically diverted, selling them to feed her own desperation. "That's not possible," Maggie whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew it was true. The resemblance was there in the cheekbones, the determined set of the jaw, the way Chen's eyes never wavered from their target. "She talked about you constantly," Chen continued, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel. "The nurse with the silver bracelet who promised to make her comfortable. The one who said pain medication was coming, just be patient, just wait a little longer." Chen leaned forward slightly. "She died calling for you, Margaret, calling for the angel who never came back." Maggie's mind raced backward 30 years to that sweltering July night when everything had unraveled. The missing morphine, Dr. Harrison's threats, the impossible choice between her career and her survival. She remembered Mrs. Chen's trusting face, the way the old woman had squeezed her hand and whispered thank you in advance for mercy that never arrived. "I thought Maggie started, then stopped. What could she say? That she'd assumed Mrs. Chen died peacefully? That she'd convinced herself the old woman's family would never know? That she'd built an empire on the foundation of that woman's suffering? Danny stepped forward from his position by the door, Thomas Reeves's journal in his hands. Tell her what you told me in the car, he said, about the choices you made. Maggie looked between them, the son of one victim, the granddaughter of another, and suddenly understood the cosmic cruelty of this moment. Her past hadn't just caught up with her, it had orchestrated an elaborate trap spanning 3 decades. How long? She asked, her voice barely audible. How long have you both known? Chen's expression didn't change. I've been working cold cases for 8 years. Your name first appeared in my files 3 years ago when I started investigating suspicious deaths at Phoenix General, but I didn't make the connection to Maggie Caldwell until last month, when Officer Reeves brought me his father's journal. We started comparing notes, Danny added, shared descriptions, timelines, patterns. Your scar, your bracelet, the way you touched your throat when you were lying. My father was very observant. Maggie's hand flew instinctively to her throat, the gesture Danny had just described. Even now facing exposure, her body betrayed her with the same nervous tics that had marked her guilt 30 years ago. The viral video was just the trigger, Chen said. We already had enough evidence to arrest you. The assault charge gave us the excuse to bring you in. The room spun as the full scope of their deception became clear. The traffic stop hadn't been random. Danny had been waiting, watching, preparing for the moment when Maggie's arrogance would give him the opening he needed. And she had handed it to him. Her entitled rage providing the perfect pretext for everything that followed. You planned this, she breathed. All of it. Justice doesn't plan itself, Chen replied, closing the file with finality. Sometimes it needs a little help. Danny pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Her arrest video had reached 2 million views, with comments pouring in faster than she could read them. Her empire, her reputation, her carefully constructed life was dissolving in real time, broadcast to the world in high definition. But it was Chen's next words that delivered the killing blow. Your daughter called 10 minutes ago. Dr. Emma Caldwell wants to know if her mother is the woman in the video. Chen paused, letting the words sink in. Should I tell her the truth? About the angel of mercy who killed my grandmother? Maggie closed her eyes and felt Margaret Sullivan's ghosts rising to claim their due.